On this episode of Pimp My Wig, I'm going to be showing y'all how to make a jet black bust down closure wig from scratch. This tutorial is completely beginner friendly, so stick around if you want to watch how to do this from scratch. So step one is coloring. We are going to go ahead and use some 40 volume developer alongside with some powder bleach. I am doing a 1-to-1 ratio, so I did take about a couple of scoops, maybe about 4 to 5 scoops of the powder bleach, and then match that with the amount of liquid developer. And I'm gonna go ahead and mix that in my mixing bowl until I get a nice even consistency. You want to make sure that there are no lumps or bumps. And now I went ahead and boiled some water on the stove until it boiled, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pour it into a container and then mix my bleach concoction into the hot water. Now be very careful because it is steaming hot, so I definitely did scorch myself a couple of times, but I am going to go ahead and now dip the hair into the bleach mixture. And to really get a higher lift, you can use clear developer instead of using hot water. I just use the hot water just to kind of spread out that developer. And for me, I do like to save my closure for last, and I let this sit for about 3 to 4 hours until I get this nice brown. And I rinsed out the hair and shampooed it off camera, but now we're gonna go in with another bath, but this time it will be the watercolor method, and I'm using my Kiss Temptation semi-permanent dye in the color Royal Navy, and I did use 2 of the entire bottles, and you want to make sure that you get all that color out of there. So definitely put some water in the bottle, swish it around, and get some more color out of that. And I am mixing the color just so that there are no stray colors flying around. And now I am going to go ahead and dip the hair. Now the thing is, you can't do this alone unless you have this hair lifted up to at least a level 5, but I did this as just kind of like of my base for my permanent hair color. And now I'm going to go into my Garnier Fructis permanent hair color in the color Midnight Iris. And unpopular opinion, but I did not enjoy this actual box dye. I ended up doing this process 2 times, unfortunately, because I feel like the hair color did not take. But I am just going to show y'all the process of me doing that. I did ended up spreading out my tracks and have it folded into a half or 4ths just so I could really get the roots, because I couldn't get the roots when there were the zip ties on it. Now for my second process, the hair color that I actually did end up using were both the Revlon permanent hair color in the color soft blue black and the Ion intense hair color in the color blue black. And I feel like those two together definitely had a stronger blue black undertone than this one, I would definitely say. But yeah, once you're done, you are going to go ahead and flip over your track and do the same exact thing on the back of it. Again, really focus on getting the roots, especially if you lifted your hair color to a nice brown, because you do not want your roots or your wefts to be brown and the rest of your hair to be black. So my main focus was really just the roots, because those were the brownest ones. The ends are pretty easy to catch, and as I can see, I'm splitting it up even into just ones just so I could really get the roots. Like, I was not playing, y'all. And now I'm gonna go ahead and start doing the closure. I am gonna go in sections and use my dye brush just to color the hair. But to really get the roots, you can go in with the baby hair comb or an actual comb just to get the roots, so you also don't get the dye onto the actual lace. And I did ended up getting a little bit of color onto the lace, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it's not in the front or in the hairline, we are good to go. And to really ensure that you do get the color everywhere, you do want to make sure that when you are parting the hair and coloring the roots, you are coloring the roots backward and forward. So what that means is that even on this part right now too, once I do my other section, I'm going to go ahead and apply it also on the front part of that part. I hope that made sense for y'all. But just make sure you do this just so that you're not missing out on any areas, because again, we want this hair to be fully jet black. So this is what I mean. We are also doing this towards the front as well too. And I do like to also make sure that I do get the hairline with my comb as well, just to ensure that everything is colored, because this hair is extremely brown. And the last thing you need is brown roots and black hair. That looks kind of crazy. And after I've done with this, I let that sit for a couple of hours, and now I'm going to go ahead and rinse that out. I am going to use my water on warm just to rinse out the hair color, just so that it doesn't bleed too much, because if you have it on hot, you are going to have a lot of bleeding. So just do it on warm or cool water just to, you know, open up them cuticles. But now onto shampooing. I am using my silicone mix shampoo just to shampoo the hair. And I did this with the bundles as well too. I shampooed it with the silicone mix shampoo and then conditioned it with the silicone mix conditioner. And I let that sit for a couple of hours. And this is how it should look once you have it air dried. The hair is nice and super deep and dark. Now it is on to the fun part. It is on to now making the wig. So you want to go ahead and get yourself a dome head that is your head size, some T-pins. This will help hold down the wig while we are sewing it down. A spandex dome cap, preferably a mesh one, and then some nylon thread, and then a C-curved needle. And don't forget to get yourself a silver Sharpie or a Sharpie that is metallic. Now I use this V part as my guideline of how I'm going to place my wig cap on the actual mannequin head, and I like to place that V part right at the middle seam of my mannequin head. And to mimic the length of my nape, I am going to go ahead and use my T-pins and use those two seams as my guidelines and drag it down just so that the wig cap can stretch out nicely and mimics the size of my actual head. And it should look like this. There are no bubbles, there are no lumps, and there's no bumps. Now it's on to sewing down our closure. You want to make sure that you're placing your closure at the middle part of that V, but also to an inch in front of the wig cap overall. And I'm going to pin that middle part front section first and then the back second. Now, how I get my closures to really lay flat is I do the X method. So I am going to take one side of the front first on the side and pin that down, and then go on the opposite side of the back and then pin it down. And then I go towards the opposite end of the front and pin that down, and then go to the back last. And you want to pretend as if like you're working with fitted sheets. I think the best way to put on fitted sheets are exactly like this for it to really be stretched out. And this is how your closure should look like. There should be no bubbles as you swipe your hands against the perforated sides. As I can see, it is not lifting up, and that should be your guideline that everything it is nice and flat. Okay, we are not mediocres out here. We're gonna make sure we get this right. Now once I'm done, I am gonna go ahead and pin my hair away, and now it's on to threading. I am using my nylon thread. Nylon thread is a lot stronger than cotton thread, and it does not swell even when you wash the wig. So I am gonna go ahead and put the thread through the hole, and I like to stretch it out about an arm's length just so it's not too long and not too short. And I am gonna go ahead and wrap it around my finger and then tie a small knot. And for me, you only just need one knot, you don't need two, and you're just gonna go ahead and pull taut. And that is how you get your knot, and then cut off the excess thread at the end. Now when it comes to sewing down the closure, I do like to sew downwards. I am sewing downwards in the same position twice just to create my own little knot in the front, just so that it doesn't remove itself when I am sewing. And I go through the same spot twice. And when you're working with the band, you want to make sure that you're going through the first layer of the band, which is strictly just the mesh and not the actual elastic part. Again, you want your wig to have some stretch and some elasticity, and you sewing through two of the layers, which is the mesh and the elastic, will cause your wig to not stretch as much. So only go through the mesh area of the elastic band and not the elastic band. And I do like to work on one side first and then cut off once I finish that one side and go to the next. And I am working on the back last. Now, as y'all can see, how I like to sew is I like to sew downwards, and I'm sewing very close to one another. So as you can see, the needle is going in between the two sides of the thread, and I'm sewing close together just so that I don't create any bubbles or gaps throughout the sewing process. Now once you are done, you are going to go ahead and pull the two threads apart and pull taut, and then cut off the excess thread. Now once I'm done with the back section, I do like to go a little bit towards the other side of the side, and I like to sew down that area just to reinforce that area, so when I cut down the thread, it doesn't unravel on me. And once you're done, this is how it should look. As y'all can see, the thread is close together. It kind of created like a little mini bridge in between each thread, and overall it is super flat. This is what you want, close together, neat. And now it's on to creating our guideline for our tracks. Now I do like to start right above the nape. I do not sew on the elastic part of the nape, and I'm gonna go ahead and just draw my lines straight across, and my lines are about an inch away from each other. It is not too far apart and not too close together. I am working with 4 bundles, so I should have enough room to fit all 4 without it being super clumped up or without me having to use extra bundles. And again, I am just working my way upwards towards the closure, and you just want to follow the natural shape of the mannequin head when you are drawing your lines. Now when I get towards the front of the actual parts of the wig cap, you can see that the parts are a little bit closer versus the back, where it's more of like an inch away from each other. And you do want the front parts to be a bit closer, so for one, all the lines can fit, but also two, you do want the front of your hair to be flush and not feel extremely gappy. So I do like to have them close together, and you're just again, just working with the shape of the mannequin head until you get towards the top. And this is how your guideline should look like once you are done. Now on to sewing down the wefts. I am going to go ahead and double up 2 of my bundles, and I'm starting with the longest bundle first. I do like to go through the 2 wefts first before I sew it onto the actual wig cap. Just so I can ensure that it doesn't leave or it doesn't unravel. So I sew it through the weft first by itself, and then I sew it through the actual cap itself. And again, on the sides, you want to make sure that where the elastic is at, you're only sewing through the mesh part first. And I am using my needle downward, and I'm going through the same exact area twice just to create a knot for myself in the beginning so it doesn't unravel. Now to make sure that the sewing process is easier, I'm using my T-pin, and I am pinning down my wefts on the other side just so that I don't have to hold and sew. And one way that I do sew, especially towards the bottom, is like I like to sew upwards, and I am sewing upwards with my thread and my needle. And you want to make sure that you're sewing this very close together. If you do this apart and you're sewing underneath your weft, you will end up having gaps in between your wefts. So I suggest that you sew very close to one another when you are sewing upwards. And I am not sewing through the actual weft. I am sewing right underneath the weft. And this will just help your bundles also last longer without ruining the integrity of your weft if you were to take this down and redo something else. And overall, you just want to make sure that you repeat this exact process all the way until you get towards the end. Now once I get towards the end, I do like to take my thread and wrap it around the C-curve needle 3 times and pull through, and then cut my weft. I do cut my wefts because first, it's not going to cause any damage to your hair, but also two, you do want your wigs to be extremely flat, and sometimes doing the flip over method may not result in the flattest wig installation. So I just like to cut my wefts. And now as I'm getting towards the top, I do like to sew downwards. I am just showing y'all 2 different ways of sewing your wigs. You can do upwards or downwards, it doesn't matter. And how I sew downwards is how I did on my closure. And I am sewing through the weft this time, and this just helps to ensure that there is security when you are sewing downwards, because there is less security when you're sewing downwards and not through the weft versus when you do it upwards. So I like to sew through the weft, and I want to make sure that my needle is in the middle of the 2 threads, and it kind of creates this mini bridge of the thread just to reinforce it. And luckily enough, you don't have to sew as close together as you did on the closure when you do sew downwards on your wefts. But as I'm getting towards the top, I am going to go ahead and start curving my wefts just so we could kind of create this waterfall effect. And when I do create the waterfall effect, I do sew upwards, and this just helps ensure that it is nice and flat, because I feel like you do get a flatter surface when you do sew upwards when it comes to creating that curve at the front. And again, I'm doing this just to create that waterfall effect so we can really get that bust down, you know, straight down, Morticia Addams from the Addams Family type of vibe. I hope y'all getting what I'm trying to say, or I hope y'all picking up what I'm putting down, okay? And once you are sewing upwards, you are gonna go ahead and sew very close together. And once we are done, we are going to go ahead and wrap that thread around the needle 3 times and then pull through. And then I'm going to go ahead and separate those 2 threads and pull tautly against one another just so that the knot can be tighter. And then once I'm done with that, I am going to go ahead and cut off the weft. And as y'all can see, we do have a nice curved little moment going on. Now I'm going to go ahead and reattach the weft, and I'm gonna go ahead and start sewing on the next guideline. And again, once I reattach it, I am gonna go and sew downwards, and I'm going to create that knot by sewing in the same section twice before moving on. And I'm using my T-pin just to you know, stretch out the weft as I'm sewing, so I don't have to hold the weft while I'm sewing. And I'm gonna go ahead and sew through the weft. And my apologies in advance for my camera going in and out of focus. I did have my aperture pretty low, so it does create that little, you know, focal point, or you know, that blur. So I hope y'all are still getting the gist of this video. And yeah, I didn't figure that out until at the end, so my apologies, but I hope y'all still are getting that. And again, to create that knot, you are going to sew and wrap around the thread 3 times, and then separate the 2 parts of the thread and pull against each other just to create that knot, and then cut off the excess thread. Now as I'm getting towards the top, the rest of the 2 bundles I did single them, and I am going to be sewing through the weft, especially when it comes to the singled wefts, just to make sure that, you know, I don't have any gaps in between my hair, because when you do sew upwards, sometimes it can create a gap, especially when you are doing single wefts. So I am going to sew through the actual weft for the single parts of the weft. And again, I'm just following the guidelines up until I get towards the top. Now that we are on our last track, I do like to sew right next to the closure itself. I am going to sew down the closure right next to the weft, just so that it's nice and seamless and there's no gaps in between the closure and the actual weft. And I kind of slightly sew through the closure and then sew through the weft just so it could connect, and I am sewing downwards. Now that we are towards the end, I am gonna go ahead and now sew upwards at the very end of it, and I am gonna like slightly backtrack just to make sure that that end is perforated. And I am gonna go ahead and wrap my thread around the needle 3 times, and then split the thread in half, and then pull tautly just so that we can create a tight knot, and then cut off that thread. And then once I cut off the thread, now I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess weft that I have. Now that we are done, I am going to go ahead and unravel the closure and start combing the hair through. As y'all can see, our wig is looking nice, but it's still looking a little humpty, but we're going to fix that. So before we go ahead and do that, I am going to go ahead and cut off the excess cap that is right in front of the lace. You do not want that part, so we are going to cut right next to the threaded area of the closure, but not on top of it. You don't want to cause any unraveling, so you want to make sure that you're cutting right next to it, or right in front of it, and then it should look like this once it comes off, just like magic. Now to tint my lace, I am going to go in with my True Match Conceal Lace Tint in the color dark, and I'm only doing one layer of this. And y'all, when I tell y'all this is like my perfect match when it comes to a lace tint, y'all, like you would think this is my skin. And I let that sit for about 15 minutes and let that air dry. And this is how it looks like. As y'all can see, the lace is not even cut in. It's just a blend, okay? But now onto flat ironing our hair. To get a real bust down, you have to make sure that first you have your nice light oil. I'm using my OGX Moroccan Argan oil, and I use about a dime size on my hand and go in sections. And I'm going in small sections just to make sure I get from root to tip that really bone straight type of effect. And I'm using my EAP heat flat iron in the hottest setting, and then I'm using my comb at the bottom of it just to do the chase method so it's nice and flat. And literally only through one pass that this hair just got straight, and it's just so beautiful. Now onto the closure part. I am going to go in with my Cara wax stick, and I'm going to go in small sections and use the wax stick on the root area alone, and then use my Andis hot comb on the hottest setting. And I am just going to press out my roots first before I go ahead and flat iron the rest of the hair on the closure. And again, I do this in small sections just so I can really get a flat effect on my closure. And I am just repeating this process all the way until I get towards the middle part of my hair. And I do have my Andis hot comb on the hottest setting. And do y'all just see how flat this hair just got? Like when I tell y'all one pass is only needed, one pass is really and truly only needed. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my hot comb and press my hairline back just to kind of have that frontal effect, and then just kind of re-flat iron for, you know, aesthetic purposes because I just want it to be super flat. And this is how your closure wig should look, y'all. Like, look at how flat and lush this wig is looking. Like, let's get into the beauty, okay? And she is flowing, honey. Now it is on to creating this widow's peak, y'all. I feel like I've gotten to the point in life where widow's peaks on a middle part, it just does it. So right towards the middle part, I am gonna go ahead and create these small little mini crescents or these small half circles, and this will just create like the perfect widow's peak for like your middle part to really stand out. And again, I'm just using just a small section, and I like to part there first and then go in with my tweezers and tweeze them out just to thin out that area until it's bald. And to make the process faster, you could go in really small sections and twist and then pull the hair out from the lace, but just be very careful so you don't run the risk of ripping your lace. And now I am just creating the same exact thing on the other side. Now I'm just plucking behind the hairline just to kind of thin out that hairline area so it looks more natural. And y'all, this is how your widow's peak should look. It's not super dramatic and I just love it. But now on to defining my part. I am going to go in with a concealer that's about a shade or two lighter than me. And then I'm going to go in with my High Beams Intense Black Spray. And I'm using my metal rat tail comb just to protect my part from getting super dyed. And then I am now going to go ahead and cut off the lace. I'm going to cut in the middle first, right before the part, and then use my eyebrow razor just to cut in a jagged motion right next to the hairline so that it looks super duper natural. Now to really have my wig on flat, I am going to go ahead and use my Nairobi setting lotion and mix that with my hairspray. And then I'm going to apply that on top of my wig just to get rid of any flyaways. And this is what really does the trick to get my wigs extremely flat. And y'all, these are the final results. I hope you all enjoyed this video from start to finish. This honestly just came out so beautiful. Again, your girl has been working with quality hair for so many years. So if you would love to get hair that looks like this, again, I only rock the best. Go ahead and check out my vendors list right now. I am doing a 50% off sale for just 1 hour today at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But like, comment, subscribe to my channel if you have not, and I'll catch you on the next one.